welcome to Alpha Militaria TV. My name is Richard Saunders. Now, I've got with me a very good friend of mine and of the channel, Tony Belas from Daystate, BRK Brocock, and NTC Optics.
Is that all of them?
That's all of them, yeah. Now, Tony's has brought down a couple of versions of a Daystate rifle, which we're going to talk about in a moment or two, and also the history behind them. Then we're going to talk a little bit to Tony about his background in shooting. And then we're going to pull a few triggers on the range down here at Reading Air Target Shooting Club.
Having already got our excuses out about the wind.
Yeah, it's very ready today. So welcome, Tony.
Thank you very much.
Once again.
Yeah.
Now then, tell us what we've got then.
So I've got a couple of Wolverines down. This is the ultimate version of the Wolverine R.
The Wolverine 2.
Yeah, we had a Wolverine 303 was the start of it,
right.
In the 30 caliber, which we called the 303 back in 2012. It started on that one.
Wow.
And then into the Wolverine 1, which was the bolt action unregulated gun. Yeah. Wolverine 2, a bolt action unregulated gun, and then into the Wolverine R, which is a side lever. Right. And that was the last one.
Right. So before we get into the detail of the history, just tell us what the difference is between these two models.
Okay, so they've got two. The stock shape is the same on all rifles, but this one is fitted with the Highlight carbon fibre body bottle. Mm-hmm. Typically used on the export rifles where you need a 480 or even a 580cc bottle. We do both now. Mm-hmm. And that gives you a large shot count, and obviously with the power that you're using, 60 foot-pounds-ish in these, then you're going to want a bigger air capacity. Mm-hmm. For the UK still loves its air cylinders, so we do a cylinder version for the UK market, really, only at 12 foot-pound now, and that has a 200cc aluminium air tube.
So this is the C-type?
This is the C-type. C for cylinder, B for bottle. Right. Canny that, isn't it? And then we have this plastic forend that clips into the stock. Right. And this sort of came out with the Wolverine 1, really. Oh, okay. And quite a revolutionary idea to clip it into the stock like this.
So there was a cylinder version of the Wolverine 1, was there?
There was. Well, the Wolverine 303 had a different stock. It had what we call the A-type stock, a much bigger stock, as suited a 30 caliber air rifle. Mm-hmm. But when we came to do the 12 foot-pound one, we wanted to slim it down. We didn't want it to be so chunky. Right. So we redesigned the stock, and on that theme, really, we've redesigned it to this beautiful stock we have here.
Yeah. So there's obviously a grey laminate and there's a walnut. Any other?
There's a forest laminate as well, which is just going out of production now. That was always a special edition, so that one's just running out now. Right. So you might see those in the shop. Very attractive.
It's too. Sort of greeny
colour. Yeah. But the smoke grey is probably the most popular. But we don't do many rifles now with walnut. In fact, there's only two in the entire series of rifles that we do that have walnut, and this is one of them. Yeah. And this has this beautiful piece of Turkish walnut on it.
Yeah, lovely. And so shot count then at 12 foot-pounds, what would be the difference between these two rifles, roughly?
Around about 170 shots, something like that, in the cylinder type. Right. And well over 400 shots, depending on the calibre, in the bottle type, because of the regulator.
Right. Yeah, so they're both regulated, right?
Yes.
And now there's a couple of, there's a special edition or limited edition of?
There's a limited edition called the Sapphire, right, which is available exclusively from the Airgun Centre in the UK, but you can buy the high power version abroad from pretty much any importer. Right. And that is in the sapphire blue finish, which we covered a couple of months ago when I was down here. In fact, in October was the last time I was here. Yes.
So the UK version is the C-type, isn't it?
The UK is a C-type. You can buy the B-type either with the carbon fibre bottle or with an aluminium bottle if you prefer that.
In the UK then?
In the UK. Oh, okay. Yeah, so you've got a choice of both types.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I didn't realise that. Cool. So tell us. So we kind of touched briefly on the history of the Wolverine name. But I gather that there's kind of the history to this rifle goes back a little bit further than that.
Yes, it does. I suppose it's an interesting one for me, this one, because the Wolverine started off as a project in 2005. And it was we were up against really Theoben at the time, Theoben Rapid, which was a fantastic rifle. And we were trying to match it with our Airwolf. And our Airwolf was, at the time, an Air Ranger, were a little bit heavier than the Theoban, and I wanted a lighter gun. I felt that was one of the tick points that we were failing on. So I went to the workshop and said, look, I want to knock £1.5, £2 off this rifle. And they went, oh, we'll see what we can do. And we started a project called the Wolverine, which wasn't named after the animal, it was named after the wolf light, the diminutive of wolf. And it was the Wolverine project, and it was a lightning project to make the Airwolf and Air Ranger lighter. And they went away, and after about a year they came back with something which went down to Steve Harper, and he got it a lot lighter. And at the same time he developed the indexing pin system. And that was a sort of blessing and a curse, that system. It was great that he didn't allow you to double load the gun, but at high power they tended to smash the pin because of the extra blast involved. And it worked perfectly well at 12 foot-pounds, but if you took the magazine out and used a single shot tray, you could still break the pin because it didn't have that back pressure. And so they struggled on with indexing pin system for years until eventually they got rid of it a couple of years ago. But that was part of the Wolverine design, and that was the reason why the 30 caliber 303 version came out first, because while they were trying to stop this thing from shattering, decision was made that, well, if we make it in only 30 caliber first, nobody's going to fire thousands of shots on a gun that does 20 shots per charge. So we'll put it in that, and by the time we get through that and into 12 foot-pound, we may have fixed this problem. And that's indeed what happened. By the time the 303 got into production, they had fixed it. But when they were putting it into production, nobody could see light at the end of the tunnel.
So were there significant mechanical differences from the Airwolf and the Air Ranger to the first Wolverine?
Yeah, completely different. So I suppose the original guns, the Airwolf and Air Ranger, were versions of the Huntsman. They were versions of the Huntsman Classic, which goes back to the LR90. They were all from that lineage. They started with putting an air bottle really on the front of a Huntsman. And then when we came to Wolverine, it was a clean sheet project. It was a square block with everything fitting it. It was, as generally every gun is built that way now. So, there's a few left over, but generally you start now with a block and you fit everything into it. But back in 2012, that was pretty new. That was, there were other companies doing it, but we beefed it up. I remember the first blocks were titanium to try and bring the weight down because it's a big block. And I can also remember thinking, at the time, wow, is that complicated? One machining process wrong and you've got a scrap block. How can this ever work? Well, when you look at the Alpha Wolf now, it's simple, but at the time I thought this is really advanced, doing that level of machining into one solid block.
And when were regulators fitted as standard to the Wolverine?
So Daystate had been putting regulators in its guns. I suppose the first regulated Daystate I ever saw was about 1990. So we started with regulators in 1990. We did the Daystate 2000 in 92, which was based on the regulator. And one of my engineers said, it's the best regulator I've ever seen. What a shame they didn't work. So that was really the start of the regulators. And we carried on developing regulators. We put a regulator in the Mark III in 2002. And that was a paintball regulator that we put in from our paintball guns. So we put that in. It was external, very interesting design, all based on the Corrick design of regulators. If anybody studies regulators, as Joe Corrick invented the regulator, well, arguably invented the regulator in modern times. He based it on a water pump system from the early 1800s, would you believe? So an open cast mining in the States from a textbook drawing. And that was really where it came from. We licensed it off Corrick and we developed that through until Harper developed the slingshot hammer system for us, at which point the regulator wasn't as good as the slingshot. So we ditched the regulators then, and a whole lot of problems of servicing and repair with it, went into the slingshot. But then the regulator thing never went away. We thought it would die off, but it didn't. People, the first question was, are these guns regulated? And of course, our guns are not known for being that cheap.
No.
And if they didn't have a regulator, it was a tick against them. It's all that money and it's not regulated. So we looked around and we found a company that had a great reputation for regulators. We went to them and they developed a regulator for us and we put it into these guns.
So which model, which of the Wolverine models, which was the first one to be regulated?
Only the Wolverine R. So everything prior to that was unregulated and slingshot. And then when we get to Wolverine R, then we actually have to redesign the gun to get the regulator in properly. You can sort of, I won't say bodge it, but you can slot one in the space. But really, the regulators have a different valve system, a different size of valve, different transport systems, and there needs to be the block needs to be redesigned to house the regulator. So that's what we've done.
But that also coincided with the shifter side lever as well. Then.
Yeah, the side levers have been a really sort of a noise in the background from, I suppose, the Varrock HW100 onwards. Now there had been side levers before that, but the Varrock really sort of popularised it. Air Arms went to a side lever, I suppose, in 2008. But carried on selling the bolts. Actually, which I think they might still sell.
Oh, really?
And so they've got the side lever. They had the side lever 2008. Daystate flirted with it a little bit, but tried to hang on to the British bolt as long as we possibly could. But when you've got a high-power gun, that extra leverage just makes it, the mechanical advantage makes it easier for you. And it was, in the end, we had to sort of go, okay, they're all going to have it.
And we should specify that, obviously you guys are known for your electronic rifles.
Yes.
But these are completely mechanical.
No, these are mechanical. This is nothing in here other than the pure mechanics. So if you are nervous of Daystate electronic rifles, which you shouldn't be, but if you are, then these are purely mechanical. We've always done that. We've always had an opposite rifle from a mechanical development as well as our electronic rifles.
Good. Okay. Well, I think next, Tony, we'll dive into some of the details on these rifles, specifically some of the key features, just to touch on those.
Okay.
So Tony, these are obviously two versions of the same rifle. So pick one and just walk us through the key features on the Wolverine R.
Okay. As I mentioned before, it's a solid breech block which everything fits into. So that gives you a chassis that doesn't flex.
So a monocoque chassis?
It is. It's not quite as developed, for instance, as the Alpha Wolf or the Ghost one, because it's a few years before. Right. But nevertheless, it is a solid chassis. It's the start of Daystate's block idea, which it's taken through to pretty much every rifle. On the back of the block, you have a safety catch, and all of them are ambidextrous. So you can have your hand on this side, or you can have on this side. There's a thumb up. This came from a Gary Kane development stock, or you can have your thumb through. Safety catches on the back here, right to fire, left, and it also has a bolt interrupt. So as you open the side lever, it engages the safety catch mechanically.
Oh, okay.
So even we're on a range here, so even if I take the safety catch to fire and try and pull the trigger,
it doesn't work. Good.
I'm glad it doesn't. I haven't been adjusted right. So
I didn't realise.
Yeah.
And I've got one of these, and I never knew that.
Right, there we are. Well, then you're using it right, aren't you? But so it has a bolt open safety. Okay. So even if you've got the magazine out, you can pull the trigger back and it won't fire. It has that built into it. Okay. Originally, we had an idea not to put a safety catch on it. We were just going to use a bolt open safety, but it was felt that was perhaps a step too far. Yeah. So the safety catch links to the bolt open.
So just tell people what the dangers of firing a rifle with the bolt or the side lever open.
Yeah, well, with air guns, with a firearm, of course, if you haven't got those things called bullets, you've pretty much got a very expensive stick. And if you've got a bayonet attachment, then it's still dangerous. But with an air rifle, of course, the air rifle is permanently live because it's its own power source. Basically, you don't need ammunition to have a gun go off. And if the gun goes off, you're never really too sure if you've got ammunition because you can't really see in the breech. So we've built in safety procedures so that if the bolt is open, like a firearm style where
Yeah.
they open to show clear, it doesn't become more dangerous.
But would you say if you didn't have that fail-safe?
Yes, if you
then-
fired the trigger on a gun without this failsafe, the hammer would come forward, strike the valve, and the air would go out the transfer port. And as there's no bolt in the way, the air would go in any direction. It would go forward and it would go back. And if there was a pellet in the way, i.e. it was just in the breech and it hadn't gone over the transfer port, the chances are, if it was a high power gun, it would push that pellet out. So at worst, you get a face full of air if your head's anywhere near it. At worst, you get the pellet backwards in your teeth.
Would you blow a breech seal with that?
You could do, because the breech seal on these is in the back of the barrel. Now, on a 12 foot-pound gun, that blasts, if you have the barrel out and you've got your hand anywhere near it, you do notice it. It's quite a considerable blast. But with the less power on 12 foot-pound gun, it's not that frightening. But on a 30 caliber 303 version, it makes your eyes water, you know, and particularly if it happens to be a bullpup version where your head's over the breech. So this is all part of the design to add another level of safety. And obviously with an air gun, because of that, you get people who understand how these work, and they say, open the breech and show clear. Well, actually, you just made the gun twice as dangerous as if you'd left it closed. If it was closed, there's a chance it's not cocked. If it's open, it is cocked. So you are adding another level of danger. So we added that to try and put some safety back to people who basically don't know how an air rifle works.
Wow.
Okay. So moving forward, we have a chamber which is big enough to get a pellet in without a magazine. And we do supply with every gun a single shot tray to help you load it in. But in the workshop where they're testing these hundreds and hundreds of shots, they never load the magazines, they just do it straight to the barrel and they just throw them in there. It's quite a knack. And you've got that loading directly into the barrel. And if you're loading directly into the barrel, you can feel the pellet going into the barrel. So if you get a loose pellet, you can feel it, which you can't do if you're using some form of shuttle. That is the advantage of loading single shot over a magazine. The latest Wolverines use this self-indexing magazine, the SI magazine as we call it. And this is basically a Steve Lilly patent from 1984 or something like that. And Steve Lilly was a genius who did the Theoben magazine. And when the patent ran out, then everybody rushed to copy it because there was no way of bettering it. But our twist on it was having a faceplate that rotates, as you might know on those ones. We have an opening front lip.
So that's held on with a magnet.
So that holds closed with a magnet. So you open it, rotate it around as per the original patent design, load of pellets into the bottom centre hole, that holds it, and then you can drop in pellets.
And capacity-wise, how many shots, different calibers?
In 22 caliber, which is this one, it does 11 shots, and in a 177 caliber, it does 13 shots. And then there's a 10-shot 2.5 in high power, and an 8-shot 30 caliber version as well. So you've got those different magazines there, and there's a nice magazine system, and it works very well.
And so just talk about the high power version. So what are the power levels in there? Because I know there's...
I think I know them off the top of my head.
But I know there are like high power versions of the standard rifle. Then there are HP models.
That's right. So you've got at 12 foot-pounds, 177 and 22. And then when you go to there's a standard 17-inch barrel version of that, which takes you up to about 35, 40 foot-pounds, at probably around 18 in 177.
Not this one.
It would look identical to that. You wouldn't have the cylinder version, but you'd have the bottle, and you could have a longer bottle. But otherwise, it would look identical. Pretty much sounds identical, apart from the noise it makes at the target at the other end. And then we do a high power version with a longer 23-inch or 600cc barrel. 600 millimeter barrel. And that will give you powers 60 foot-pounds, pretty much topping out around that because of the regulator limiting it.
That's 30 caliber as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, there is a version for a USA where they take the regulator out and they can go up to 80 foot-pounds.
Oh, okay.
Not commonly sold, but you know, for people who really want that high power, in this style of gun, they can do it. But the regulator does put a knot in the system as per high power guns, so it won't go that high. Right. Having said that, 60 foot-pounds is pretty reasonable, isn't it? Yeah. I think 30 is enough, to be honest. There we are.
So talk us through you're going to have to close that side, Tony, because it's freaking me out.
Okay.
But talk us through the trigger.
Okay, so the trigger is a development of the original Daystate trigger. So a guy called Barry McCraw turned up at Daystate one day in the late 80s and said, I've designed this trigger for you, here you are. And they've been refining that ever since, and the penultimate version of this, you know, it's really as good as they can get it. Yeah. If they want to make it better, it's got to be redesigned. Yeah. It is an exceptionally crisp and light trigger. Yeah. It has an adjustable first stage, and then a very crisp, as they say, let off, and you can adjust the over travel. Well, they all break like glass, don't they? I don't know. I haven't broken a lot of glass to tell you, but it is a nice trigger. Yeah. It's I wouldn't say it's Olympic standard, you know, but it is good enough for everything you're likely to use this rifle for. It's adjustable
for weight and length of pull?
Weight, length of pull, first, second stage weight. You've got a trigger position as well and trigger angle. There's a shoe on it as well, on the world's smallest dovetail, so you can get it backwards and forwards. So it has some adjustment in as well. They I suppose if there's a problem with it, they don't go that heavy. We have people who are perhaps coming from a shotgun shooting, you know, where they have a natural twitch from the things by, and they like relatively heavy triggers. And I suppose the maximum weight you could get this to is just over 2 pounds. After that, it starts getting really creepy. So it's not the minimum weight, which probably goes down to under a pound. It's the maximum weight. It will only go up to about 2 pounds.
Right. And just talk through the two gauges on the side, on the other side of the Tony.
When we adopted the regulator, one of the problems that I knew from our early days, remember I mentioned we'd started regulators in the 80s, is this cry in target shooting is, I think my regulator's gone down. And nobody knew. And if you had a bad day, it's because my regulator's gone down. And it was inside, you couldn't tell. So we decided that we needed an indicator, not only to see what the regulator pressure was, because it's a bit of a black art if you've just got a regulator and you don't know what it's set to, but also as you fire the rifle, you can see, and we'll do a close-up on that, you can see the regulator gauge rapidly emptying and refilling, and that just gives you a movement. The lower the pressure in the rifle, the more movement you see. And when the main gauge gets down to regulator pressure, which is effectively, as far as the gun's concerned, empty, that will start to move down as well. So you can see that the regulator's working. You can see the regulator filling and refilling. Of course, if that gauge is equal to the front gauge, it tells you that the regulator's bled through and broken. And if it's closed off completely, that's another tell that you're going home early.
But a lot of people contact me and say that they're concerned that they've gone below their regulator pressure. Have I broken it?
No, you're just you're now not working on a regulator gun, you're working on an unregulated gun, and there will be so how these things work is that the regulator, as I said, puts a slight knot in the system, but we've got plenty of air and plenty of power, so we can easily tune the gun to 12 foot-pounds. As I said, they'll go to 60. So we tune the guns so that we try and keep the regulator pressure as low as possible. So on a 12 foot-pound gun, we're about 100 bar on the regulator. On a high power gun, it could be as high as 140 or 100, even 170 on a very extreme case. But when you get to 100 bar on a 12 foot-pound gun, the regulator stops refilling the secondary chamber, but it will still operate. And it'll operate, but of course, every shot you are running out of pressure. And the pellet will initially start to lose 1 or 2 feet per second, and then it gets to the point where it can't cope and it just starts to draw off completely.
But if anyone does run underneath the regulator, it will sort itself out. Once you fill it with air again,
it makes no difference at all. You can empty them to nothing. It doesn't make any difference to the regulator.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that when you get onto regulators, depending on the build of the gun, so lesser manufacturers, what happens is when it gets to regulator pressure, suddenly the system becomes efficient again.
Right.
And you can have a spike up.
Okay.
So you're doing 11.5, come to regulator pressure, 11.6, 11.7, like, and then it dies off.
Right.
If you are running too close to that magic 12 foot-pound figure, and you don't allow for that spike, or you design the gun not to allow for that spike, then you can go over 12 foot-pounds on an empty gun, which is not something you would know unless you're going looking for it. No. So it's something that we have to consider when we're building the guns, that we don't get too close to the system to not allow for it, or we don't have it in the first place.
Well, and so just talk people through what they should be filling their Daystate Wolverine and generally their rifles too.
Well, Daystate rifles are individually set up. I know it sounds like a cliche, but we have two people on the range who sit there all day taking the guns from the engineers and testing them and filling them and individually setting them up. They are autonomous. If they're not happy with the gun, it's not going out. And that means, because they know that if it comes out and it comes back, it's going straight to them. So they're going to not pass it. And they will check the gun. And while they're doing that, they're setting an individual pressure on the side of the gun. Now, it's kind of a little bit redundant with regulators because this one is set for 230 bar, and that's exactly where they're all going to fill to a regulator.
Right.
So 230 bar is a nice pressure for a regulator.
Yeah.
If you put 250 in on a regulated gun, it's not going to make any difference.
Right.
You just get more shots, but it's a bit more pressure, isn't it?
But generally speaking, you should really stick
to that. Now, an unregulated gun, it's critical because it has this power curve, a filling curve, and if you overfill the gun, there's too much pressure to open the valve, so the power will drop. I think if you put more air in, you're going to get more power. It doesn't work that way on an unregulated gun. On a regulated gun, the regulator regulates it, so it always stays the same until you get to that point where you've run out of air. So, but if you have an unregulated gun and you don't know, I think this is what you're implying, if you don't know what to fill it to, then basically, in my experience, if you fill it to 190 bar, you're about right. Very old guns, because they worked on smaller, low-pressure air bottles, might be 160. So a Daystate from 30 years ago is going to be 160 bar, very low. But any modern gun is unregulated about 190 bar, and a regulated gun generally around the 230. And they're perfectly safe to. I hear people, I only fill my guns to 200 bar. You can, not bad practice. But it's not any less unsafe at 230. No. These have bottles. This bottle here is made by Intercom. I had lunch with them a couple of years ago. I said, what is the burst pressure? Come on, tell me. It's a secret. I won't tell anybody. And they said it's around about 1,000 bar, Really? So that's, that's the burst pressure of that, So it's incredible. He said sometimes they go a little bit under, sometimes they go a little bit over.
Makes me feel confident when I'm using my stirrup pump now that I'm not going to blow myself up.
You can't. One of the things about safeties on these is in the UK we have British standards, so we have to build the guns to be 2.5 times over safe. The US have a different system, and they have to have a thing called a burst disc where they disc. And how we quietly, like every other manufacturer, I assume, achieve that is with the gauges, which contain an overpressure burst. And if you look very closely at these gauges, you'll see a small witness hole in the side, and that's where, if you overpressure the gun, the air will come pouring out. Now, it'll probably go occasionally up to 300 bar without blowing. Some of them will blow at 250 plus. But there's a little bit of fudge factor there. But 300 bar plus, it'll blow. And if you're in the States and you've got one of these 450 bar bottles and you pop that in, your gauge is going to blow, and you're going to be looking to buy a new one. But you can buy them on the Daystate stores.
Cool. Well, thanks, Tony.
Okay.
I think we can do some shooting now.
Why not?
Yeah.
Appreciate it.